Hi guys, it's me again. Wanted to jump in and let you know a little bit about what Section 4 looks like for you guys over the course of the next week. We're going to be moving at a bit of a faster pace going forward. There won't be as much assignments going forward like we've been doing. We're going to focus more on the presentation you guys have to make, and then of course before the end of the semester, we'll make sure you're reading the material that I assigned at the beginning of your syllabus, and that you guys get the paper done, I think, toward the end of April. So we've still got a bit of time before we get there. Did want to let you know that going forward, the class is going to involve some videos because we're going to start moving into an era where we actually don't just have documentaries about, but we have live footage of. And so we're going to get into the civil rights movement here in the 20th century pretty soon. Before we do that, we have to kind of give, an overlap of something like 70 years. So kind of what we've done so far is look at the conditions that have surrounded slavery in America, what made it thrive, why it was localized in the South, why in the North, because of manufacturing, it developed in a different direction, and generations later, it came to see slavery as an institution that was evil because they didn't utilize slaves. So here we are. There's been tension building. So you're going to see the videos breaking down into a few sections. Section one is going to be the lead up to the Civil War. There's a video on there that I want you to watch called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is just kind of showing the absurdity of American politics. It was a ticking time bomb, and just how like they had to maneuver the craziness to keep the country from exploding. Eventually, it will, and it will directly lead to the Civil War over the issue of slavery and states' rights. Now, there will be a figure there that you're going to study, Abraham Lincoln. You'll learn a little bit about him, what caused the Civil War, but particularly of interest to us. After you see those videos, you'll see what happens after the Civil War. Now, if you can imagine um, growing up a slave, a war is being fought, and then one day someone rolls into town. They didn't have internet, they didn't have TV, they didn't have news agencies like we do, and it's an army officer from the north, and he says, "The Union has won the war, and as of today, you are all now free men and women." Can you imagine what that would have meant? I mean, it is just completely remarkable reality that all of a sudden exists for individuals. And yet, here's what they don't have: they don't have money, they don't have land, they don't have education, they don't have resources. So, what is an African American supposed to do? So, this is going to lead into an era, which is Section 3, called Reconstruction. And Reconstruction will be an abysmal failure in American politics. But what the attempt was for, as part of Reconstruction after the Civil War and rebuilding the country, was not only granting slaves rights, but also giving them, ideally, something that they could start to build their life off of. There'll be go arounds, there'll be pressures from the South, and eventually, for the sake of unity, they will not institute some of these changes. Some of the videos will explain it in more depth, but it's a sad reality. It's kind of the great what if the country had kind of followed through on its hopes and dreams and promises to African Americans, could it have mitigated some realities? What you'll see come out of the South, where the vast, vast majority of African Americans live. We're talking 90+% of African Americans. This is where the Confederates who lost the war from, is that as slaves are being granted rights, now they have the right to vote, at least men do. And so they can continue to vote in politicians and, which can lead to new laws and new realities that favor the African American. In the South, where many of the states, blacks outnumbered whites, they're going to start using intimidation factors to try to scare the African American from exercising his right to vote. And so you're gonna see the pop up of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, because of this. They're going to use tactics, and it will get so bad that this is where you're going to start to see the era of lynchings. So just be noted, there is a couple pictures of real life lynchings. They're from a distance. It's not like you can see, but lynchings were a real scare tactic in the South, and it was very hard to police. And so That's going to be reality. Now, out of this is going to come the next great wave of great African American figures. And how does the African American take care of himself, provide for his family, and unite under the community? This is where the great institution, the NAACP, will form. But there's going to be two great figures to arise really at the very end, and I have no clue why there was just balloons that went up. That was weird. There's going to be two great figures that pop up um, out of this era at the very end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. So the first person is going to be a man named Booker T. Washington, okay? And what he's going to advocate for is he's going to advocate a compromise amongst African Americans. Hey, it's very dangerous for us to try to push for our rights all the way. We have more rights than we've ever had before. We have freedoms. We don't want our children to lose their lives. We don't want to have what little resources we had taken away from us. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to encourage communities to you're second class citizens. That's better than being slaves. So essentially, and that's a gross generalization of his policies and his thoughts, but he is going to advocate essentially like a compromise, and have a long view. Build your lives, build your reputations. Eventually, we'll overcome long time down the road. So that's what's his tactic. Now, the other great figure was a man named W.E. Du Bois, and he had a completely different tactic than Booker T. Washington. And he was one of the originators of the NAACP. He was, hey, like, go for your rights all the way, no matter what, no compromise. A little ahead of his time, kind of like would have fit into the civil rights movement that we'll see in the next section with people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I want you to hear this. Though these men and figures had different tactics, neither it wasn't a right or wrong. It was a different way of looking at a very complex and tragic issue. Booker T. Washington's compromise view may not sit well with us today in light of history, but if you got to put yourself in their shoes, if you saw your communities being uh, burnt to the ground and people's lives are at risk, especially young black men, and your poverty was only looking worse, you're not necessarily looking, how do I get all of my rights? You're more looking at how do I just get us so that we're in a position where we can survive. And so, they're different tactics, different thoughts. There's a video there that will show you a little bit more about that. But what's going to happen is essentially you're going to start to see something called Jim Crow laws come into place. Jim Crow is a figure that kind of defined African Americans, kind of a minstrel figure. And Jim Crow laws pretty much, they said separate but equal. So this is where you start to see separate schools and separate bathrooms and separate restaurants. But there was nothing equal about it. It was very much second class, second quality. And so it was an intimidation factor to keep blacks confined to their communities and away from the polling stations to be able to vote. And so, though had the technical rights, it wasn't actualized for many, many years thereafter. So, as part of the tactics, after like kind of the law starts clamping down on the KKK, at least the first wave of the KKK, the tactics will shift over to trying to imagine the African American in some of the most horrific ways. And this is where we get minstrel shows like blackface, so like that, thing where people go on theaters and they paint their faces black and they act like buffoons and idiots. So you'll see this start to come out into the early 20th century. A new medium is going to present itself, and that's called theater. Well, all of a sudden, some of the earliest movies and shows that will be put on the big screens will have African Americans, but they're always depicted as an unintellectual, um, buffoonery, silly, um, almost like driven by instincts. They can't help, like when they're around women, they can't help themselves. When they're around watermelon, they can't help themselves. They just eat like an animal almost. So two of the videos you're going to see, one is called The Birth of a Nation. It's the very first movie that went to the big screen. In fact, it was the very first movie, excuse me, not to the big screen, but was showed in the White House. One of the first movies, one of the big picture hits. But Birth of a Nation glorifies the South and their endeavors in the Civil War. Now, it's complete ridiculousness, but it was kind of very racist. And what it was showing was um, what happens to a country when blacks are allowed to exercise their rights. So you'll see them take over Congress and the Senate and all. They won't have shoes on, and they're eating fried chicken right in there, and it's just a wild mess. This is the image they're projecting of this, and this is the first film shown in the White House. So that's one. The other one is a documentary piece. It's a clip from a documentary piece by Spike Lee. And what he does is he's just going to show about a few minutes of clips of African Americans through about 50 years of film and how they're projected and depicted. So it's a lot of material to look through. But where this takes us from is the beginning of the Civil War all the way through the beginning of the 20th century. Um, uh, Jim Crow laws are in effect, separate but very much unequal. When we come to the next section, we're going to start to hit the civil rights movement because that's when we start to see pushback toward the rights we see. Okay, so hope you guys are well. No assessments or questions. About a week from now, I'll give you the next section that we can work through. Okay, so watch the videos. See ya.